Hi there, and welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
I'm Dave Higgins.
And with us we have a special guest for the first time ever, Colin Moby.
Hi.
Hey, Colin.
Hi, guys.
So this episode we're going to be talking about outlining, which is my kind of key thing that I think I do best at, other than maybe first draft, so that's good fun. But we're going to start off with a brief update on what we've been doing in terms of writing this week. Colin, as our guest, would you like to go first?
Yeah, no problem. It's a good job. I've had quite a good week then. Probably churned out about 2,000 words, which for me in a week isn't bad going at all. Mostly in the morning. Been getting back into my early mornings before work. Finished my first. This fancy book I'm working on at the moment. I've split it up into 3 parts and just focusing on one part at a time, and which includes outlining one part at a time before outlining the next part, which will be interesting to talk about later. But yes, about halfway through the first part, getting to some of the action scenes, which has been a bit more interesting this week. I've also been playing around with dictation, which is, as everybody says, you've got to persevere with it, and they're definitely right. I've not yet committed to spending lots of money on kit and software and stuff. Been trying a lot of the free stuff, but there's potential there. But it's not something I think I'm going to crack soon. But yeah, I've been playing around with that because I'm a bit of a gadget freak. So
yeah, I tried dictation as well, and it just gave up. It was going slower than typing on a keyboard.
Yeah, I think you definitely need to persevere. There's some new apps coming out from Dragon Nuance soon, who appear to be the leading software manufacturers, but they've got some free stuff, better than their current free stuff coming out soon, so I'm just keeping one eye on it. But I don't get much time to sit down, so I'm hoping I can do a bit of pacing at work and a bit of pacing outside as well. Maybe crack out a few words that way, but I'm probably 2-3 months off before really getting into that. So, but yeah, not a bad week for me.
Cool. Dave, do you want to go next, or I can go next?
My week's been the same length in terms of days, but quite short in terms of writing, because I woke up on Monday morning thinking I hadn't slept very well, but by 11 o'clock my sinuses were solid and my throat felt like I'd been eating gravel. So I lost most of my writing time because I could think. I couldn't think for an extended period, so it was like starting a writing session over and over again once every couple of minutes, as my brain went, oh yeah, we're supposed to be doing something. So I managed to get the next episode of 7 Stones, my weekly Swords and Sorcery serial, written and edited. But apart from that, I didn't really get any serious writing done. However, all these shiny worlds, indie publishing anthology that came out on Monday, has a story by me in it. And so that was, I suppose, technically something writing related that I did this week. Went, way, I've been published again.
And you should mention it's free as well. I mean,
well,
people should go and grab a copy.
This is why I'm glad that I'm not the publisher on this one, because the price was supposed to be 0, and it went to 0 for several Amazon stores on Monday. So we started announcing it's published, it's free, and then the price went up to 99 cents halfway through Monday. And the publisher went to Amazon, what's going on? And they went, oh, it's just a temporary glitch. We fixed it. And then people started reporting they were still seeing it. Amazon said, oh, that's just the cache. If they empty their browser cache, they'll get the right price. And so we advised people, if you're seeing the price, do this. People did it. People opened Amazon in a browser. They'd never been to Amazon before. People offered private sessions. They were still seeing the price. And then finally it went down again, and then it started showing us 99 pence in England, and it's been going up it's been going up and down ever since. I think it's now actually like holding at free. Fingers crossed. But,
I was going to say, I must have got lucky. I got it at free. And I haven't read anything yet, to be fair, but I must have got lucky. But it's a good-looking book, has to be said. Definitely the cover's a good-looking book.
Well, then we would try. Well, one of the aims is to gather together indie authors, indie publishers, just to show that just because you aren't like HarperCollins or Pan Macmillan doesn't mean you're automatically going to churn out something where the cover's something you pulled off the fridge and you haven't bothered to edit. So we're trying to show that indie authors, indie publishers actually can be equal to the kind of things that the big 5 or 6 or 3 or however many of them there are at the moment, depending on your criteria, can produce. So hopefully, fingers crossed, everyone thinks it looks good, because it's a cracking cover.
Yeah, certainly, for whatever my opinion's worth, I don't think you can tell it's an indie book from the cover. So
we'll take that as victory.
And I read the first story. I haven't gotten further than that, but I read the first story by Misha Burnett, and that was excellent. It was very, very poignant and very good.
Yeah, one of my favourite authors ever. But, Misha writes some cracking stuff.
I have the what's it called? The Cat Skinners
book. Yeah, that's a bit different from the short story, but I mean, it's the same sort of voice, but Cat Skinner's book and the rest of that series are a little more creepy horror. But, yeah,
I'll have to get to it. It's on my to-be-read list, which is massive. But then I watched the Martian movie this week, and then went, okay, the movie's good, but I want to go and read the novel again, so I'm back reading the Martian again for the second time. For me this week, I was kind of demotivated because I've had a horror of a January with work and with stuff at home and stuff, the cars breaking and stuff like that. So I took it very easy this week, and then we had a little gap with Adventure, which we just had a story meeting before this. So I then thought, okay, I'll try and edit Shiny New Swindle, which was the second one I published back in 2013. And editing is not my thing. I hate editing. So then, normally I get up at 5:30 and go into work about 6. So I work from 6 until 7 and then work over lunch. And then I was just sleeping in until 6:30 and then going in at 7 in order that I just start my day job. But I managed to get up to chapter 10 in Shiny New Swindle, and the editing is atrocious. I'm kind of a perfectionist with that kind of stuff, but I've gotten to the stage 3 years later where I'm looking at that going, oh my god, that's atrocious editing. And that was professionally copy edited. So that makes me think that the guy who copied edited it did not do a good job. So that was, hundreds of dollars wasted. But at the same time, the thing about indie publishing is it's never too late to fix things that are broken. So I can go back and copy edit it myself with what I know and at least fix it from my knowledge.
Yeah, and you can get a new edition or a new tweaked version up in under a day. So, yeah.
The one thing I did like about Shiny New Swindle is that the chapter cliffhangers are great. Even if I do say so myself. That each chapter ends in a place where you're going, oh, holy crap, what happens? And then go on to the next one. Hopefully. So that's done pretty well, and I think done better than I've done in some of my newer books, so I need to kind of concentrate on that again. But yeah, that's what I did this week. Oh, and Facebook ads. I'm still trying to crack Facebook ads. Where I've gotten it to about 150% return. So if I spend $10, I get $15 back. but obviously there's a lag because Amazon pay you 3 months later.
Yeah.
So then I'd have to invest a lot of my own money from my day job in order to then get the money back, so it then can cycle upwards.
Yeah.
But I'm still trying to tweak it. I want to get it to about 200%. That'd be a good thing to aim for. And yeah, so I'm tweaking different levels of that. Tweaking the ad, tweaking the text, and tweaking the target audience, which is now set to, it was set to 35 to whatever, 100. And now it's set to 45 to 54-year-olds because that's what Facebook told me tend to click it most. Which would make sense because my stuff is quite similar to the sci-fi that was out in the 70s. So slightly older than I am would make sense that those are the people who would be reading sci-fi and fantasy in the 70s and might want to read more of it. So that was my week. We can get on to our topic, which is outlining, which, as I said, is my speciality because I hate editing. I mentioned in the first episode, because I hate editing, I want to do as much as possible in the outlining phase so I don't have to edit as much. So, Colin, you had questions about editing, or outlining, sorry. We could maybe start with that, about your process and the questions you had about it.
Yeah, I've got lots of questions. I've, as you probably gathered from the gadget freak in me, I like to try stuff, and I must admit, since I started writing, I must have read just about every single book, tried everything, mucked around with stuff, and I've never really settled on one approach. And it's interesting to hear. I've seen you guys talking about different methodologies, the story grid, and various other bits and pieces. It's sort of, I suppose, the way I've approached it is, in my head, there's been two elements to a story. There's been the characters and the journey they go on, and then there's the plot. And I must admit, in my outlining, I spend a lot of time on the plot, because to me, unraveling those mysteries, those bits, the detail of what is actually going to happen is a bit where I get stuck when I'm writing. That's when I hit that. The keeper just stops. I'm like, well, how? I put them up a tree and I've set the tree on fire. How will I get them out of the tree? And everything I read, the outline is they get up in a tree. Bob sets the tree on fire. They then get out of the tree in a clever way, and then you move on to the next bit of the outline. And I've always struggled with, actually, I want to know how they got out of the tree. And when I'm in, I need to be in the most optimal creative mood to solve that in the moment. So I must admit, my outlining, I tend to puzzle things out, and as a result, the characters sort of suffer a bit. So I then go back and I try and do a character outline, and I've tried different things, and I tend to get a bit lost then in, actually, then that contradicts the plot, and then I stick to the character outline and forget the bits in the plot, and I end up with sprawling documents, and so my Scrivener files get a little bit out of control. So I'm kind of at that point at the moment where I'm trying to refine it. So this seemed like a really good opportunity to speak to two people who are several books ahead of me and say, how have you solved some of that? Have you been through that same journey, I suppose, is one thing, or did you go through a more methodological approach to the methodologies, without wanting to get too confusing, or what would you recommend in particular? What did you do, and why did you do it that way? Because I think you've said on a couple of previous podcasts, look, everybody's different. So what is it that you do, and why does that appeal to you, I suppose, is the starting question. And I must admit, I've got quite a few detailed ones just to pick away at you. So I've got two particular things. I use the story grid to outline the inciting incident, the complication that happens after that, the choice, the climax, so what happens after that progressive complication, the choice a person makes in that scene, and then the outcome, the resolution of that choice. And I kind of stick chapter by chapter. I've stuck to that for the character element. But overall, I've looked at the pants off. I can't remember her name. Libby
Hawker.
Yeah, Libby Hawker. Her book has a really good structure to taking characters' goals through, and I've played with that a bit as well. And that seems to, ironically, although it's focused on character, solve the plot problems for me. So between those two, but I've got loads of stuff mixed up into that. That's kind of where I am at the moment. But I'm struggling with it because it gets out of date very quickly and things change very quickly. So what do you guys do is the first question, and then we'll go into detail after that if you like.
Sure. Well, I can share I have a novel template in Scrivener that I start with every time, which is here. So first I have my initial idea, whatever the first thing I thought about what the book should be about. So I snowflake that into a couple of sentences. Snowflaking is where you write a couple of sentences, and then for each sentence you write a paragraph, and for each paragraph you write a page, and then you end up with 3 pages of the story, or maybe a bit less. So that's just kind of that gives me kind of an overall idea of what the story's about. And it's very, as you say, it's like they climb a tree, Bob sets the tree on fire, they get out of it cleverly, but it doesn't explain how or what, unless I have the idea at the time. And then I go to 7-act structure, which is Dan Wells's thing, which is he has a series of videos on YouTube which are very useful, where he explains what 7-act structure is. So you put a heading for each character that's important, the protagonist, the antagonist, and so on. And then you start at the bottom. Where do you want them to end up? So say you've got Joe, who's a hero. You want Joe to become, like, he saved the world and he's, got accolades or whatever. And then you go to the opposite, you go to the start, and you say, okay, what's the opposite of that? Where could Joe be that he's not a hero, he's got no accolades, which is, the hero's journey, basically. Then you go to the midpoint, which is what would make the change from him being a nobody to being a hero. And then you go through all the different ones like that. So that kind of gets you the character progression, which means that each of the characters, both the protagonists, antagonists, maybe the sidekicks, have arcs. They don't just, stay the same the whole way through. And then I combine the snowflake and the 7-act structure together in roughly chronological order. And then I kind of smooth them out, as you were saying, like, Colin, you end up with a mess where things are going all over the place, so you need to smooth it out to kind of make it make sense. And then I do setback reaction, which I got from writing fiction for dummies, where I read a kid's book back when I was a kid called What Good News, What Bad News. So the story is essentially Joe is on a plane. What bad news? The plane caught fire. What good news? He had a parachute. What bad news? The parachute didn't actually have a parachute inside it. What good news? He's going to land in a swamp. What bad news? There's crocodiles in the swamp. That's essentially what you do, where you say, okay, the tree is on fire, so they then have water in their flasks, but the water is not enough to put the fire out, so then they have to come up with a new idea, and so on and so on. So I do that, and then the newest one I've got is from Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, where it's meant for movies, but it's quite useful, where he's kind of pointing at things that you should have in your story to make it kind of resonate more. So at the start, for instance, the hero should have a scene where they show that they're heroic, even though they might be, the pig herder, that they do something kind or something nice or stand up for someone or whatever it happens to be to show that they're the hero. And then other ones, for example, are the opening image should mirror the closing image. So they should almost, if you watch there's some YouTube videos where they show the opening and closing images of movies, and they're practically the same thing. And after all that, then I should have the plot to a story. Like what I've done is as you've done, Colin, I've read a lot of books, and anytime there's any kind of a outlining method, I then take it and use it as well. And the more I use, the less editing I have to do, because I've gone through a lot of different rounds of outlining and come up with a lot of different ideas, which then means I can take the best one in each case. And if it's a slightly wobbly idea, then I've probably gone through it a bunch of times and made it a bit more concrete.
Wow. Well, question. Blimey. There's a couple of things that jumped out there that I really like. The going, starting at the end and going from the end to the beginning to the middle was fascinating. I hadn't thought of that. and whether that could be done. I'm wondering whether that could be done on a chapter by chapter, scene by scene basis as well. Helps some of those problems.
Definitely, and what you're doing with your outline, Simon has explained with his usual obsessive methodological detail all of the fine detail things, and now I will make a broad sweeping statement about things that sort of each step of the process for me is about taking something that isn't quite perfect, doesn't quite match this soaring universe of brilliance in my head that sprang up when I had the initial idea, and making it better than it was before I started. So you're starting off with your very rough one-paragraph book and breaking it up. And so once you've got your story outline for the novel, then definitely, yes, break it down to chapters. And I'm writing a Swords and Sorcery serial at the moment, so that's exactly what I do. Sort of Monday morning, open up a new blank document, take the end point for the last serial section, stick it at the top of the document, and then go, well, what do I want? Where do I want them to be at the end? Where's the next significant step? How are they going to get from where they are to the next significant step? And so I'll write that out. I'll do that setback reaction all the way through to fill it out. So I've got sort of 10 to 20 points where something bad happens, they overcome it or change the situation, something else happens. So you've got that. And then go through and make sure, well, the first thing that has to happen, because it's a classic pulp serial, is we fix whatever it was that was a cliffhanger at the end of the previous one. So you've got, you know where you're starting, you know where you're ending, you fill it in, and you refine. I refine that, I change that. I think, well, do I need this section to set up anything else? Do I need this section to close off a previous subplot? Sort of looking ahead at the next couple of episodes, is there anything I need to introduce, foreshadow, whatever? And you slot things in, slot things in, slot things in, and then you go through, and sometimes you go, well, actually, that's immense, and that's going to be more than a couple of thousand words for a part. So break that into two, turn it into 2 chapters, and then take the first half, go through it again, fix that up. And somehow, no matter how many times I take a serial section and break it into 2, I never quite end up ahead. So you're always sort of coming back to the thing that you thought you'd done last week, so you're ahead of yourself. You go through it again, and it needs another polish. But definitely, yeah, you can take it down to whatever point you are. And I'm trying to remember the name. Jack Bickham. He's a very sort of like each scene in a chapter is a thing that changes. So each scene is a reaction to the previous one. So he takes it down below the chapter level to the scene level. And I can't remember the name, but there was someone who was advocating that each paragraph should be a mini thing. So each paragraph ends with a hook that the reader has to know the answer to, and the next paragraph starts with letting the reader off that hook, but immediately hooking them with something else that they have to know the answer to, and then ending the paragraph.
I think that might get a little exhausting for the reader.
Well, it gets a little exhausting for the reader, but I I don't write paragraphs where the reader can't stop at the end of any paragraph, because as a reader, I want to be able to put books down sometimes. And so a book where every sentence is designed to make you read the next one because you can't not would just wind me up. But it does show that some people do take it down to the paragraph level. So you definitely take it as far as you need to go. But my other thought, coming at it from the other end, is the first outlining I tried to do was classic Aristotelian method. So you start off, you work out, is this story a tragedy or a comedy? If it's a tragedy, then the hero will fail at the end. And if it's a comedy, then the hero will succeed. And I mean, it's the Greek tragedies and comedies, so it's not whether it's sad or funny, it's whether the hero succeeds or fails. And then you have the hero starts off, as with Simon's method, in the opposite position from the one they're going to end up in. And then they have a trait that drives everything. And you have a series of steps that work on that trait. And then you have the big turning point at which the hero's trait causes them to go the opposite way. So if you're writing a tragedy, the hero will have a minor victory and then a significant victory. And then they will be heading towards a critical victory, and then the trait will cause them to fail. And sometimes it's a classic hubris thing where the great hero's arrogance causes them to fail. Sometimes it's actually something that the modern reader would think, well, that's not actually a bad reason for failing, like mercy. So that the villain is running towards the bomb, the hero can dangle the villain's child over lava, but they don't because they're merciful, and so the villain sets the bomb off and the hero fails. But there's this structure where they get further and further away from whatever state they're going to end up in, and then suddenly they plummet or rise depending on which way they're going, and it comes out as a tragedy or a comedy. I tried doing it, and it's got this rigid, here's how you do it, and it just never worked for me. And I worked out in the end that my style is to put in the deep and meaningful stuff later. So if I try to write an outline from the basis, we'll start off with it's going to be a hero who has a tragic flaw, and they will fail at the last because of this tragic flaw. It becomes all very structural and it lacks life because they're moving from place to place. Whereas if I start off with, well, I'm telling a story, and then you break it down and then you go through and discover, okay, it's there naturally, so then in the editing I'll put the theme, the imagery, all of the stuff you talk about in English literature classes, and all of the stuff that the Times Literary Supplement go, well, yes, and his use of flowers to signal the inherent meaningless of the universe is sublime. You put that in at the end. So for me, the outlining is about just getting actually the in-world events. So possibly if you're finding your outlining is stalling out, maybe look at an outlining approach that has a different view on meanings. I mean, you said, Colin, that you were having difficulty with plot-driven outlining, and you were finding it easier when you went, well, I'll I'll do what the characters do. So it's the same sort of if you're having difficulty getting your story to hold together, consider, well, would it be better if I took a more theme-driven, structural approach to outlining? Or if you're finding that your outline's there, but the book's coming out terribly dry and you can't get the life into it, maybe try a more, well, I'll just tell a story and then I'll fix the deeper meaning later.
I think reflecting on what you guys do and how you learn from all the bits you've done and how you just explained it, one of the things I am doing is I have expectations that the outline will solve all my problems in the book. So it will crack character, plot, theme, all those things will come from the outline. And I think it's a great insight into looking at what type of person I am and actually where the energy will come from in the book. And it will be plot, because I like the character stuff, but it's plot that I want to solve the plot. So if I can get the markers, the milestones, the things you were talking about, Simon, looking at the problem, then going back to the position they were in before that problem happens, and then see the journey between those two things, I can layer in the character, or I can do it the other way around. But I think all the advice says to focus on certain elements, but I've tried to make the outline too much, which I think is a great piece of advice. Just honing in on what you want the outline to achieve, what type of writer you are and what problems you need to solve. So does that mean, Dave, that do you actually do a lot of re-outlining as things come to you, or both of you, I suppose? Simon, yours seems a lot more problem orientated. Do you do a lot of re-outlining as new things occur to you as you're writing or as you're outlining?
Well, I view the outlining as very much like a sat-nav. Say, sort of, you decide that you're going to fix that shelf in the garage, so you're going to need some stuff from a DIY shop. So you stick B&Q into your sat-nav, you set off in the car, you're driving along, and you're following what the sat-nav tells you. The sat-nav tells you to carry on going because you set it to go to B&Q, but you think, well, actually, thinking about it, that didn't I hear on the radio this morning that there's congestion on the ring road, so maybe I'll go to MFI instead. So you ignore the sat nav, you take a left, you go to MFI. And the sat nav's telling you sort of you're off route, but you think you know where you're going. You decide to go to MFI instead. You go to MFI, you pull into the car park, you get out and you discover they're closed or they've got exactly what you want or whatever. So, and that's your deviation from the outline either working or not. But if it worked, then you're not going to B&Q anymore, so you recalculate. But if it didn't work, you can still get back in your car, turn it on, and the sat-nav will tell you how to get to B&Q from where you are. So the outline, for me, is a series of steps that will get me a story that was better than not having the outline. So at each stage, I'll deviate from it. So if I have a new idea, I'll explore that, safe in the knowledge that if the new idea doesn't pan out, I can always go back to the previous one. So it's a constant improvement. You put the ideas in. If they work, you've got a better whatever it is you're doing. So a better revised outline. The first draft comes out better than the outline. The rewrite comes out better than the first draft. Whatever. So I think, as you say, the problem might be if you start trying to make the outline everything, then you get stuck in fixing the outline. Whereas really, potentially, you're better off. You go, well, I know where I'm starting from. I know where I think I want to go. I know how I might get there. And then if you think when you're partway through, well, actually, I could get there by a more interesting route or by a quicker route or whatever. Or you discover, actually, I just suddenly realized trees aren't flammable, because I set that up in the previous book, that trees aren't flammable, because it's fine. And I've completely forgotten that. Okay, I'll have to fix that now. But you can always make things better if you've got something to make better. So, for me, each of the stages of the outline, and I don't always do as many as Simon's methodology sets out, is just a way of getting me something that I can go, well, okay, I've got an idea, I've expanded the idea, I've got a rough outline for the story. Again, with 7 Stones, I had the idea, which was sort of a cross between the old David Carradine Kung Fu of like wandering priest fixing problems and the gritty, dark fantasy. I'd had this idea. I came up with a rough, well, there's going to need to be some sort of arc to drive it onwards, pretty much like an episode. Break it down into rough episodes, and then, well, break those down and break those down. So each time I am re-outlining sections of it, and I'll come up with a good idea in an episode I'm writing, and I'll just stick that into my meta outline of the whole series. And then when I come to that section of the outline, it's there, and I just disregard the old notes, expand on the new ones. So definitely, yeah, it's not formally re-outlining so much as you accept that the outline you've got is good enough to get you moving, and then if you need to change it, you change it without worrying about the fact that your outline is sacrosanct. If it all goes horribly wrong, you can just go back and go, well, okay, well, I had an outline that sort of worked, so I'll go back to that.
And is that something your mindset is now? Was your mindset like that when you first started writing, and you didn't let past?
No, my mindset when I first started writing, well, the first book I tried to write, I pantsed it because I didn't know any different. I thought, well, you start off with a paragraph of story, like a sort of private investigator discovers that magic is real. But like, okay, well, I've got this really great opening scene, so I'll write the opening scene, and then I'll write the next scene, and it kind of trickles off because I didn't have a place to aim for and places to get there. Which is where I went, well, okay, so how do you write a story then? Which is where I sort of encountered Aristotle's rules of great storytelling, which are based obviously on Greek theatre, which was very structured, very formal. And that was my introduction to outlining, and that didn't really work for me, so I kind of created that, and I tried then writing the story, and I was still effectively pantsing the bits between these 5 key scenes. But that made me realize, well, if I knew roughly where I was going, then I can just kind of come up with a way to get there. So what if I create just lots of little waypoints? And in starting to collaborate with Simon, the second thing I did with Simon, because the first thing I did with Simon was review one of his books, which the first writing I did with Simon was Legendary Author Battles, which if anyone's played Consequences as a child, where one person writes a sentence and then you fold the paper over, and just leave the last bit visible and the other person writes a reaction, which is again very much like the setback reaction thing. Only we did that on YouTube with an author would record a little snippet of the story, and then the other author would try to record a follow-on snippet of story that would put the first author in a really difficult position, and you'd alternate back and forth. So that was a that was when really I started focusing on, okay, stories actually work well if the reader's thinking, oh no, they've got to solve this. Whew, they've escaped, but oh no, it's still not great. And then you slowly come with more and more victories and fewer setbacks at the end to ease the reader into the ending. So I definitely I started off with the idea that you wrote the entire book, you set it out, knew exactly where you were going, and then that's the book you wrote. And if you don't do that tightly enough, you're left thinking, well, I don't know where I'm going. If you do it too tightly, you don't have any room for those great ideas you've had.
Well,
so
I was going to take your analogy, Dave, on revising outlines, which I certainly do as well. So rather than you having a sat-nav, if you think about it as you being really anal retentive and making an itinerary for a bunch of friends to go out and have a day out, and the protagonist is driving and the antagonist is in the passenger seat and you're in the back. So you say, okay guys, we're going to go and have breakfast in this restaurant. And so you start setting off on your day, and then whilst you're driving you say, okay, the next place we're going to go is this museum, and the antagonist says, no, museums are boring, and grabs the wheel and says, no, we're going to the water park. And that's where you start losing control of your outline, and you have to re-outline when your characters are saying, this isn't interesting anymore, or this isn't what I'd like to do, especially the antagonist. For me, at least, the antagonist is always too stupid in the outline. They fall for traps. They do things that the hero expects them to do so the hero can be heroic. And the best books I've written have always been where the antagonist has said, I'm not that stupid, and then started doing, they're thinking 2 steps ahead, because a person in real life would go, okay, what would the hero do? What's the obvious thing? So the hero's not going to do the obvious thing. They're going to do the thing that's beyond the obvious thing, or maybe 2 steps beyond the obvious thing, and I can trap them that way. So that tends to be the way I end up re-outlining. And I don't worry about that. I don't mind if the outline gets thrown out. I've had characters who are meant to end up together say, yeah, no, I don't love him. And then you're going, but there's meant to be a romance here, and you're saying you don't love him? Yeah, no, I fancy the other guy. And that kind of messes things up. But then I think it makes a more authentic story when a reader is reading it, where it's not just falling into, a pattern. I think that's why Game of Thrones works so well, is because it bucks the pattern, because people know story. They know what's going to happen. And if you're in certain genres, you can do that. If you're in others, if you're in the romance genre and they don't end up together, you risk annoying readers. But if you're in fantasy and they don't end up together, that can happen. I mean, you have the potential, as long as you do it in an authentic way to the characters. You're not just splitting them up for no reason either.
Yeah, I think that's the important takeaway for me there in what you said. The quote, it's okay to throw the outline out, sounds straightforward, but actually I think when you're starting writing, which I've only been doing for about 18 months or so, you kind of feel like you failed if your outline hasn't given you all the answers. So I think that's an important takeaway. But the qualifier is the characters tell you to. That actually, this doesn't this doesn't feel like something that would naturally come out of the point you got to. At that point, that's a good barometer test to say, actually, you might want to rethink here, which is, I'd not thought about it quite like that. It didn't, when I've done it before and I've been writing, it hasn't felt right, but I've not been able to understand why. And then you start and you just go down in that spiral of, well, the outline must be right. I'll go back right to the beginning and try and change everything. And I think there's some useful takeaways there. And the outline's just a tool. I think I get carried away in it being the answer to everything.
Well, it's all just tools.
Yeah.
And in the end, the only thing that matters is the published book. Anything that happens before the published book is just a stepping stone between you suddenly in the shower thinking, but what if octopuses liked cheese? And coming out with the published book. So
Yeah.
if the outline is working for you, then stick with it. If it isn't, then try making a change. If the change doesn't work, then it's not the published book, so you can junk the last couple of chapters or just go back to the last point where you felt that it was working and try again in a different direction. Suddenly have a brilliant idea. That, well, if the brilliant idea fits your story and that's what you feel you should do, then pursue it. If it needs something fixing earlier in the story, then just make a note saying, well, I need to fix these things so this works, and then carry on going. And then if your brilliant idea turns out to work, you can go back in the next draft and fix those. If your brilliant idea suddenly runs into a wall at full tilt and you're left thinking, why did I do that? Patently that this hasn't worked. Then you haven't done any of the fixing to the stuff you'd already written. So you haven't spent that effort on something you're now having to cross out. So if you just take the mindset that your point of this process is to come out with a published book, how you get there is up to you. And the outline is, well, I now know how I can get between where I think I'm starting and where I think I'm finishing. And then if anything changes, well, I'll change then. There's no shame. No reader is going to put your book back on the shelf and go, well, it's a brilliant book. I really would have loved it, but I just can't read it because the outline was revised twice.
I mean, that's the key thing, is that the first draft and subsequent drafts are more outlining. They're just long-form outlining. So if you write a first draft and halfway through you go, well, this doesn't make sense, but you continue on writing the rest of that first draft and you get to the end and then you go, okay, but the first half of this book doesn't make any sense, then you got a second draft and a third draft and a fourth draft and so on. And I would say that every book I write, the first 2 or 3 chapters have to be rewritten, because they're the ones where I'm getting to know the character or characters. And there's a psychological trick which I read about, which is that when you read fiction, you start to know that person as if they're a real person. And as soon as you know them well enough, you know what they would do and what they wouldn't do. So if you have a close friend or a family member, you know what they would do in a certain situation. And when you know a character well enough, you know what they would do in a certain situation. So as you're writing, you're learning what that character would do. So then you go back to the first few chapters and you go, well, no, that character wouldn't do that. Why are they saying that? And you fix it because you actually know the person at that time. As Dave says, nothing is fixed until the book is published. And if the whole first draft needs to be thrown out, I mean, no one will know. I saw during the week that they did a Game of Thrones pilot that was completely terrible. And they threw the whole thing out and started from scratch, rewrote the whole script, recast 2 of the characters and refilmed it. And now everyone wouldn't know that the first one was terrible. Nothing counts until it's out there.
As long as Sean Bean still died, and I think they were still on track, bless them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another good insight there in terms of I've always thought of the outline as quite different to the first drafts, but I suppose it's just a zero draft, essentially, and can be treated the same in terms of revisiting it and making it work with the other parts.
Well, you're chunking things up in a somewhat arbitrary fashion, because it's sensible to break it up into chunks. Because if you went, well, okay, it's going to take me say 18 months to write this novel. You're a sort of starting novelist. You haven't got your process down to the finest of nuances. It's not a subsequent book in a series, so you've got all of that sort of character and world stuff that you're not absolutely focused on and absolutely down with. 18 months. Okay, so in 18 months' time, I'm going to publish. Go. Your brain's going to go, we've got 18 months, so we don't need to start now, or...
You know me too well.
You're not going to do well. Whereas if you say, okay, well, I'll outline in a month, I'll write the first draft in 6 months, then breaking things up for, I want to be at this point by now, is good for any project. But like any project, if those points slip, it doesn't actually matter if it takes you 2 months to outline, 6 months to write the first draft, and then you do the second draft in a month rather than 3, or whatever, because if you hit your target at the end, you've got what you wanted, and how you got there is only really important when it comes to the, okay, well, next time I want a better process. So outlining, I'd say an outline isn't quite like a draft, because for me, a draft would actually include the dialogue and some scene description and so on. So actually, an outline is something where someone reads it and they say, that's a plan. Whereas a draft would be someone reads it and they say, that's a book. I mean, potentially a not brilliant book, a book that goes all over the place and has lots of spelling mistakes and so on. So there's a kind of separation, but it's a very nebulous one. As Simon's mentioned before, in various places, he used to write scripts for his books. And so if you've got a script, that's not a novel, but that's not just a plan for a novel either. That's blurring the line. So,
but it didn't work for me. I mean, I was going to share something which I think is really the most important thing for most authors, which is everyone's an individual. So if you track... Huh?
I'm not.
You're not. So if you track things, which I do, like I used to track every half-hour segment. I track a bit more now than I did. But like that way you can tell, okay, on the Bite of Forest Dark, for instance, I did less outlining, or did more outlining rather, if you see there's 12 hours there, than I did on the Bite of Rust. But the Bite of Rust has a better efficiency rating than the Bite of Forest Dark. Bite of Forest Dark is 15,000 shorter. So the outlining there didn't help. So it is down to as well fine-tuning everything that you do, where sometimes you'll be doing too much outlining that's not actually going to help. It's just going to take more time. So I spent 4 hours there extra on outlining that didn't actually help. So it's about fine-tuning things as well, to say, like if you track everything, you can then say, okay, this didn't help. It seems like it helps, or you get a better book out of it. Maybe you get better reviews or something, and then you can use that kind of metric to know that that's a good thing to do. But overall, mostly it's about how long it takes you to write a book, and if it takes you longer when you do one methodology than it does with another, then perhaps it's better to do the second methodology. Anyway, we're over our 45-minute episode, so we should probably wrap things up. We could probably go on for another hour.
Yeah.
So make sure to check out Colin's book, Memories Stirred, on Amazon. I put a link in the video description. And make sure to check out Dave's book, which is All These Shiny Worlds. Did I say it right? I keep messing because I've got shiny new Swindle and shiny young adult and stuff. I keep messing it up.
It's been catching me too. I keep sort of, I'll abbreviate things to shiny, and I think no, I can't do that because like two of Simon's books are called Shiny as well. So all these shiny worlds. Yes.
Yeah. And my shiny young adult, which is not related to all these shiny worlds, came out on the 1st and is also free. So you can grab a couple of free books and grab Colin's book as well. Was there any last things anyone wanted to say?
Can't think of anything. No, I know. Obviously, we've had Colin on. If anyone else wants to come on, then let us know. If anyone disagrees violently with anything we've said, then obviously let us know, and we'll meet you in the car park later.
No, the only thing from me is just say thanks. It's been a pleasure. Been good talking to you offline, but been fascinating talking to you online as well. So appreciate the opportunity. Cheers, guys.
Oh, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Really good. Grant, so we'll end it there. We'll see. Oh yeah, sorry, we have a week hiatus next week. So next week, next Saturday won't be an episode, but we'll be back in 2 weeks' time, and we'll see you then.